Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. My name is Malathi Renati, and I head the policy school at the Takshashila Institution. And today I have two guests who are part of the first alumni batch of the inaugural sports capsule course that we concluded recently called Building a Sporting Nation that Nandan Kamath and I had co-created and taught. And this was hosted on the Open Takshashila platform in collaboration with SSA, that's the Sports and Society Accelerators. So allow me to first introduce Ram Mohan. He's a management consultant and a sports enthusiast who advises startups in the sports technology space. In his early years, he played badminton at the university level and later at the state level before commencing a corporate career of over 3 decades. He currently plays golf and tennis regularly and is a passionate advocate of the benefits of experiencing multiple sports to discover the true joy of playing sports. So welcome, Ram.
Thank you. Thank you, Malathi. It's a pleasure.
Thanks, Ram. I also have Vinay Rao. He's an engineer turned entrepreneur looking to make a difference in the Indian sporting ecosystem. He's currently the CTO of Pagalfan, which builds AI-driven products at the intersection of real-life games and esports. Previously, he was the CEO of Taproots AI, which offered academic and athlete management software to grassroots academies. Welcome, Vinay. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Malathi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I hope you both enjoyed the course and have derived many learnings from it over the 5-year course period.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Can't stop praising it enough. Malathi, you and Nandan did a fantastic job.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for that. So today we will be actually looking, the topic that we're going to be focusing on is promoting a sporting culture in India. And I'd like to first set the context before we kind of get into the conversation. So as we all know, India is the most populous country in the world. We overtook China recently. And with over 1.4 billion people, that is 1/6 of the world's population, we're also a very young nation. We have roughly around 65% below the age group of 35. So it's very important that we need to ensure our human capital are not just skilled and employed, but it's as crucial to ensure that they're living a healthy and active lifestyle. Right? So sport is an essential component of the global culture, and its influences can be seen in many aspects of everyday life. In fact, sport is a popular means of maintaining good physical and mental health, but it also has a wider social, economic, and political implications. Again, with India's economic prowess, which is on the rise, we have grown over the last few decades and are now the 5th largest economy. So with this rise in status and with more disposable income, we have seen how sports has played a large influence across the 3 pillars. That's the Samaaj, which is the society, the Sarkar, that's the government, and the Bazaar, the markets. Okay, all these years, the government has been the primary driver of sports, since independence. But the time is ripe now to have society and markets join in the action and together play a crucial role in its growth. So today's podcast will primarily focus on society and markets, and our discussions will revolve around how these pillars can help build a sporting culture and in the bargain ensure we are a fitter and healthier country. And this is across socio-economic strata as well as the demographics. So we will first look at the society, and I would like to ask Vinay, that broadly, we have 2 categories, right, of sports enthusiasts. We have the ones who are active and we have the ones who are passive, right? Those who actively participate and the others being passive, they are also spectators and supporters. And of course, the rest all fall somewhere in between, right? So Vinay, how can we encourage our society to start playing more, in your opinion?
Great question, Malti. And it's a absolute pleasure talking about this and getting into the weeds right away. As far as getting people to play a lot more is concerned, I think it's a very broad question, and to answer that question, we need to get into segmentation of our audience itself. there's the slightly older generation, and how do we get them out and about? There's the middle, which is the large demography which our country represents. How do we get them to play more? And then there's the kids aspect of it. I will not go a lot into the kids aspect of it, because Vijay Krishnamurthy and Saumil Majmudar, in their book Get Kids to Play, have done a tremendous job, tremendous amount of research. It's taken them a couple of years, probably more, to write that book. So I'll maybe focus on the other two, and
Right.
start talking a little more in that space, right? As you rightly pointed out, India is a young nation. We have a lot of people in that 20 to 40 age group. And uh, I think in the what, why, how framework of things, the why is, it doesn't beat most people. I mean, most people get it. There's a health benefit to it. There's an engagement angle to it. There's a social angle to it. I think most people get it, but
Right.
there are still barriers which are preventing people from indulging in it. So, and I've been doing some amount of independent research in this space. A couple of things that I think can really, make an incremental improvement is to make sport accessible to these age groups. So, if people are not going to play sport, can the sport come to people? I think that's one of the is an angle worth considering, because
Yeah, interesting.
if you look at the oldest age group, right, walking is probably their most primary form of getting their exercise in, and a lot of us live in these societies, and there's enough place to walk around, etc., right? So is there a way where we can piggyback on top of their walking and add a sport angle to it? Because sport by definition is a physical activity that gets your heart pumping. I mean,
Right.
that's basically what sport is. So without us getting into the infrastructural dependencies or expectations of what is widely attributed as sport, cricket, football, all of these, if we can take simpler and slightly less popular games like disc golf, for example, infrastructural investment is minimal. You're essentially walking the entire course, which people are anyway doing. You just add an element of the scoring and playing on top of it, and suddenly you have people indulging in a sport. So I think
Right. Could you explain a little bit about what disc golf is for our listeners, Vinay?
absolutely, it's golf with flying discs. So you have 9-hole courses, you have 18-hole courses, and it's a fairly famous game in the Western world, where people end up walking 5 to 7 kilometers with a teeny tiny scorecard and a pencil. And you have par courses 3, 4, 5. And the intention of playing that game is to get the disc into the so-called hole. It's a very accessible game, extremely cheap, so to speak, monetarily speaking. And I think most of us at some point in our life have thrown a flying disc.
Right, right.
So
I think I see the importance of, Vinay, where you mentioned the low entry barrier, right, to ensure people just start getting physically active. I think that's
correct.
important.
Correct.
And that's something that we need to focus on if we want to get the society at large to be involved.
Absolutely. And games which are accessible without you having to waste a lot of time in figuring out the logistics of it. And that's where I talk about getting the sport to the people. I think that those are a couple of ideas in terms of what we can do to get people to play more.
Right. Great, Vinay. Thanks for that, the broad sweep. Ram, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think a very interesting question. So, I think a couple of points are relevant, and I would like to just build upon what Vinay started off with, which is essentially access, right? So, I think there have been enough surveys to say that, if there is a sporting facility within walking distance or maybe a short cycling distance, most people would prefer to do that, right? And I always keep talking about this concept called the joy of sport, right? And that joy is very human. It's very natural for most people to engage in a sport. And if they have the access, most people would take it up. So I'm fully aligned with that thought that if we make it more accessible. What I find very interesting in what Vinay said is, there are sports like pickleball or paddle or, the other sports which perhaps can reduce the demands in terms of physical infrastructure and so on. And that seems like a great idea to kind of try out and see if we can get more people, if the facilities were easier to get to and a much more contained in a fashion, right?
Right.
So I think, of course, I could keep going on about this, but I'll hand it back to you right now, Malathi, so that we can develop on this topic as we go ahead.
Right. Thanks, Ram. And I think what's also important for us, being such a large nation, right, and we're having a huge socio-economic divide also we need to keep in mind, is that the low entry barrier is important. So we spoke about organized sort of sports, and especially a few recent ones that have come in, like pickleball and others. But we should think of the unorganized also, because physical fitness,
Right.
health, all this, right, any physical activity to begin with, right, just to get kids to, for example, free play, right? They don't need to kind of have any equipment for that. So I think it's important to kind of plant that seed in society where children especially get more time to play outside, play indoors if they have to, but then it helps also move them out of the addiction to digital gadgets and other things which we're seeing more of, especially in the cities. But the joy, as Ram mentioned, right, that comes with playing, right, just can't be done away with at any age group. Yeah, Ram?
I just wanted to add, I know one more thought which came in is, the getting kids to play, I think is connected to the point that getting the elder people also to play, because it's really a continuum, right? And
Right.
if you have experienced sports as a child, as a young man even, there is a tendency for you, it's all that more likely that you will continue that, right? So I think, getting the kids to play is still very important. And that's the foundation of all core improvement.
Right. And then families then come together, right? And that's where I would like to
Families come
segue into the
together.
next question, yeah, where we had the active, like, if you want to physically be part of it, you want to be in the action, but you also have the spectators, right? So typically when you have kids playing, the families will come to encourage their kids.
True.
And so I think that's a very important part. And I'd like to hear from both of you. I'll go with Vinay first, and then Ram, the importance of spectators in sports, right? Not just organized sports, but even otherwise.
Absolutely. In fact, the spectators are probably, in my opinion at least, one of the most important enablers of sporting activity. Of course, there's the social validation angle for the athletes themselves as the number of people increases. But in my
Right.
experience with Taproots and some of the activities that I've done along the way in the last 3-4 years, some of the interesting educational elements that came out of the exercise were at the elite level, right? If you take IPL, cricketing IPL, spectacle as an example, the monetary numerics that are involved are mind boggling. There's billions of dollars being spent simply on media rights because brands and advertisers have fully figured out and understood that any event that pulls eyeballs to it is worth
Right.
spending money on, right? So at an elite level, this is a very well understood exercise, but the benefits at the grassroots levels and the incentives are different. So from an athlete standpoint, the incentives are that of, hey, more people are coming in to watch me play. There's a little bit of an adrenaline rush. People do really well. Athletes do really well, which is awesome. The other reason spectators are important, and more reasons why the friends and family circles need to start getting involved in watching these little athletes play, is simply because by being those spectators, your macro level and a micro level market,
Right.
the people who bring money to the table, are now suddenly interested because they're like, hey, that's under 16 tennis match between player A and player B had about 50 to 100 people. Maybe it's a great place for me to go sell tea, coffee, whatever.
The potential is there, right?
There is massive potential, and there are so many events that are happening pretty much every single weekend. From a Bangalore context, I'm sure it's true about other cities as well. If as technologists and if as the Samaaj side of it, if we can facilitate information sharing, I think simply going and looking and viewing sports with your family would be a great thing to indulge in.
Thanks, Vinay. I know we don't have much time, but Ram, let me just hear what you have to say before we get into the last question for the society bit.
Yeah, well, try to keep it brief, even though there's a lot you can add to that, because I believe that, it's kind of linked. The families,
Right.
the children watch, their parents play, they are more inclined to kind of, the
Very
parents
true.
will come and join them when the children are playing and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And, the same thing applies in a much bigger way to a community itself, right? So I like to give the example of Indonesia in many cases, because Indonesia, is kind of similar from a socio-economic
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, but they
Right.
have taken to badminton in a huge way, and they produce many champions. They do
Right.
that because badminton is seen as a family sport.
Mm.
So I think it's kind of linked in a sense. The parents play, then the kids will play, and they'll watch each other play.
Right. And the sheer joy that one gets, right? It's not just the competition, because sometimes competition kind of takes away the joy one has, right? When they play, the sheer adrenaline rush and other things.
Yeah, I think the problem is when the parents don't play and they just push the kid to play,
Right.
then there is an expectation which is built up, which is not very realistic, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about enjoyment anymore. It is about achievement, which
Exactly.
takes away the
Right.
fun from playing the sport
Mm.
itself.
Yeah. So I think that's important. I think two key takeaways from what we discussed so far, which I just want our listeners to kind of remember, is that if you're a sports enthusiast, right, you should either be playing or you should be supporting the sport, right? And this could be any game. It just could be a game that's played in your local area, in the public parks. Sometimes, you can just sit and watch a cricket match that's being played with not just a tennis ball. It just could be see small kids playing on the street as well, right? Just encourage them and just you realize that by doing so, right, you are kind of making them being physically more active and wanting to step out rather than being indoors. But also it kind of encourages that in a society, right? We see more of that happening around us, and organically as a society too, we'll start encouraging that, right? Whether it's in events like the recently concluded Dasara event in Mysore has a sports component to it. It's part and parcel of the Dasra, the 10-day event itself. So I think these sort of things are something that society should demand for, and markets will automatically supply. Okay? So coming to the next question. That I just wanted to kind of cover, because we're looking at the society, is that we know that we have a huge human capital, right? With our more than 1.4 billion population, there would be some way that we can encourage more people to participate in this as volunteers, and this happens in developed nations more easily. But in India, we still see that there is a bit of hesitation to volunteer, right? So I know, Vinay, that you're kind of, you've been doing a bit of research because this is an area of your interest, right? What would you say are the ways that we can encourage these volunteers? Because eventually they are going to sort of oil the cogs of the sports ecosystem, right, so to speak, over a period of time. And we hope that this will in turn cause a ripple effect to organically develop the sporting culture in our country.
Yeah, and what volunteering brings to the table is a unique combination of you getting involved, yet not necessarily needing to be physically fully in it as far as the
Right.
sport is concerned. And the biggest advantage of volunteering is you get to learn the nuances of the sport that you would otherwise not necessarily partake in. So, volunteering is a massive gap in the market as far as my understanding is concerned. There isn't enough know-how as far as how do I go about volunteering, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying as an independent research activity of making those barriers fall down and make volunteering a much more common thing in Indian households. Now,
That's great.
there are so many kinds of volunteering, right? So there is in-game volunteering. So you could have children go and I'll take the example of tennis because
Mm-hmm.
children can go and be ball boys and ball girls as an example.
Right.
Um, you
And
could
it's fun
be,
to do, right?
and it's a great way of running around and being a
Right.
part of the actual event itself. So it's a lot of fun.
Close up. Mm-hmm.
And slightly older ones who are reasonably well versed with the game can maybe do a little bit of certification activity and actually become umpires. So that's a great volunteering activity that you can partake in. You could be event volunteers, chaperoning traffic if necessary, getting people their ticket stubs. So there's the event volunteering side of it. There's the
Right.
roster preparation side of it. There's a tech volunteering that you can do where you could build simple app interfaces or web interfaces and allow people to register. There's a whole lot of ways that you can partake in sport, and this goes back to the initial point that I was making, where if we can bring sport to people, And I think one of the pleasant consequences of it would also be that volunteering as an activity starts blossoming. And there's a lot more that I'd love to get into, but I know we are right on time, so I'll let you decide where we go. So
Yeah, sure. No, but I think this is great. I think giving the examples that you did as to ways that people can get involved, and there'll be certain skills, right, that one would have, whether it's a tech skills, whether it's enjoying speaking with people, right, whether it is just you're more the kind who does things in the background, where you can manage an event, right? So there are different ways that we can get in, and I think it's also not really restricted to any age group as well. Volunteers could be across age groups. And I think it's families could also volunteer together, right? It's a fun activity that you can do over the weekend or
it's
for
a
an event.
great social gathering exercise in itself. Doesn't
Right.
take too much time in terms of losing your weekend or any of those concerns are concerned. So volunteering is awesome and a great way of getting into a sport, I think. So yeah.
Right. Could you share more concrete examples, Vinay, about
Absolutely.
how one could do that?
So one of the biggest education I got out of the course that we were a part of was the triangle depiction of the Samaaj Sarkar Bazaar, right? And it got me thinking that when talking about the Samaj, which is the bottom right vertex of the triangle, we could actually visualize the same triangle as another micro triangle within the society context. Because I'm sure a lot of us live in these apartment communities, at least in Bangalore and large cities. There is a resident welfare association that exists, which technically represents the government at a much smaller level.
Right.
So if as society, as enthusiastic volunteers, if we can work with the policymakers, which is our quote unquote policymakers, which is our associations, to enable, again, going back to the example of tennis, just enable a weekend showcase of a tennis event. Mobilizing volunteers to come and help with the event shouldn't be that difficult. And there is monetary benefits because the local food seller, the local clothes store, the local sports store now have incentive of captive audience to come and sell their products too. So there is sponsorship benefits also that comes out of it. The athletes, the children who are going to be participating in the event, in the showcase event, have more eyeballs to get onto them. So that's a simple thing that we can facilitate where we live, Malti. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great, Vinay. And we look forward to once you're done with your research, and I believe you want to put an app together. So good luck for that. And I'm sure this is an area that has not been tapped right in the past, and I'm sure it'll do well, especially in RWAs, because I think that's where most of the interest is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, Malti.
Ram, anything you'd like to add to this before we close the society and move on to the bazaar?
No, just maybe a very quick side note on the ball boy thing that Vinay brought up. I think if you need to encourage anybody, Vinay, I would suggest you tell them that both McEnroe and Roger Federer were ball boys in tournaments.
Yeah, they started off that way. Yeah.
And many, I'm sure these are just two names. There would be many more, right? So it's a great way to experience the nuances and learn the game a lot better if you're an up and coming kind of a tennis player.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's the same with even golfers, right? We know many caddies who have actually gone on to be top golfers also, because you're up and close to the action, and you're also alongside watching how international players, especially in some cases, right? If you look at the Grand Slams in the case of tennis, or even in the case of golf and other sports, international events where the caddies are part of, essentially understanding the game alongside the sports person, right? And they learn so much from there that encourages them and motivates them to play the sport themselves. That's great. So I just want to touch upon we have the National Sports Policy Draft, the 2024, that has actually just at the time of recording this session, it's come out. And there's some very interesting points there that they've mentioned regarding physical literacy, which I will just kind of quote so that before we move on to the markets. They've spoken about an action plan for imparting physical literacy from early childhood, and that becomes a sort of a central component of the policy. And they plan to also align it with the National Education Policy 2020, because there are many aspects in the NEP 2020 which talks about sports and physical literacy and about ensuring sports becomes one of the main subjects and not just an extracurricular activity, right? So that's what they're trying to drive towards. And this also ensures students develop a lifelong appreciation for physical activity and well-being, because it's important that we catch them young, right? If it's something that's inculcated at a young age, it turns out to not just be a life skill, because there are many things that one learns from sports, playing organized sports, but also just being part of the physical activity that comes with it. And then they naturally will ensure that their health and fitness, not just for themselves, but also for their family members, is kind of taken care of, right? So I think it's important that children are exposed to this at an early age, and many other countries have done so, and the results are there to be seen. They have a healthier nation and a fitter nation also. Okay, so we'll just move on to the bazaar now. So we know that the markets also play the role that they're playing in building a sporting culture in India. And of the three pillars, like the society, the markets, and the government, the market is the only one whose primary existence is to make profits. Right? So that's what drives them. So they're essentially trying to work as efficiently as possible. There's an expertise that they bring in. They're, like I said, driving profits, and as a result, there's that creativity and innovation that kicks in if it's a free market. And as a result, it also promotes consumers to have more choices. And because customers have more choices, there'll be more competition as a result, and it's good for the markets in the long run. Now, the only drawback of markets is that they're not interested in social equity, which is something that the governments typically have to take care of. So ensuring things like inclusivity, equality, this is not what the markets would naturally steer towards. But if there is a use case in which there is some that is beneficial to the markets, right, then they will act. So, and they'll act purely, you'll notice that it's a non-emotional manner in which they will operate. So they're looking only for profits. The markets are looking only for ensuring that they stay ahead of the game, right? And especially when there's competition. So keeping this in mind, right, and the limitations that the markets have, Ram, what is the focus of the sports market currently in India?
Let me start with the good news, right? The good news is the industry or the market itself is growing at about 15%, right? So,
oh wow, okay.
I think the numbers that I saw from a survey from Group M were looking only at the media, the sponsorships, and the endorsements, which is related to a league, for example, the broadcast rights and so on. Mm-hmm. That itself was about close to $2 billion, or 16,000 crore rupees in India, right? And so it is probably growing at a very healthy pace, and so that's the good news. And the even better news probably is this is just the media rights, the sponsorship, and so on, right? If you look at the broader sports industry, there are upstream industries around infrastructure, around equipment, and there are downstream industries around coaching academies, tourism, and so on, right? Mm-hmm. So the entire industry itself is going to be quite big. Some research indicate that it's going to be $100 billion industry in about 3 years' time, 4 years' time,
3 years,
2007, right?
Mm-hmm.
So sports is big business. And now the not so good news is, and it depends on your perspective, of course, is a big chunk of that $2 billion that I mentioned earlier in terms of the media rights and sponsorship and so on is really cricket. Right, so about 87% of that money, it's probably no surprise, because if you look at the glitz and the glamour and the attention that IPL commands, it is 87%. But what that also means is that the other leagues, the Kabaddi League and the Football League, and now the Hockey League, these are all vying for attention, and I think it's only a matter of time before they also grow. So the size of the pie expands for everybody. Right. So I'm not sure if I'm directly addressing your question, but your question was about the overall sports industry, right? The market itself. Right. So I think it's good, and there's still a lot of potential for growth. I mean, I'll just end it with this thought that if you look at a global kind of a situation, closed, and from an employment perspective, anywhere from 2 to 4% of our employable population is actually employed in something related to sports. Right? It might be a little more in the more developed economies, maybe a little less in other economies. In India, it's less. It's maybe around 0.5%, right? And these are statistics which have come out from a government body itself, from the Ministry of
Right.
Commerce. So I think that means that there's a lot of headroom for growth, both in terms of the economic kind of scale of things, as well as from an employment, which is of course related. But even as an employer of people, sports has a lot of potential. Right? So that's where I would kind of leave the thought behind. We are doing very well when it comes to cricket, both in terms of the talent we produce and in terms of the economic benefit that it generates. We're not doing well in the other sports, and that makes a case for building the other sports to a similar kind of a level.
Absolutely. And I think that's also, it shows that we have the potential, right? We've done it with cricket. Now, it doesn't mean that we could take a leaf off the cricket's book in terms of the business model, but it might not, and we've seen that happen too. It doesn't run successfully for other sports. So I think it's a great way for markets to also be more creative and innovative in how they approach the different games. Because a sport like chess, for example, which is a board game, recently we won the Olympiad, right? The strategy would be different for a chess from a marketable perspective, because when you're watching two people sitting at a table staring at a board, right? It's not appealing to the masses, right? But if you were to make it more creative, now there's rapid chess that has come in the recent league that concluded, right? So I think it's nice to know that cricket might have reached and is doing really well because of certain decisions that were made and because of the path that it's taken. Likewise, each sport and game, right, can have its own path.
One of the other things that I feel is technology, what it has done is it's allowed to create a tribe around a sport, right? So if
True.
it is not necessary that the audience that you are looking for is only within the physical kind of location. It could be
Absolutely.
anywhere. And there are YouTube channels which focus exclusively on chess, which run into hundreds of thousands, say, even millions of
Worldwide too, right? So it's not
subscribers.
restricted to a region. Yeah, absolutely. Vinay, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I wanted to bring in the Brahmaputra Volleyball League example as well. I think
Great
it's
example.
very relevant to the conversation because what Abhijit Bhattacharya has done with volleyball in Assam is nothing short of incredible. And it actually has a very good blueprint of how we can start things off at a grassroots level and impact upwards of 4,000 children is the most recent number that I read. And there is market aspect to it as well, because I have been following their journey ever since I attended a talk by Abhijit a few years back.
Great.
And I've been following their progress. Their website's gotten updated. The number of people associated as sponsors has exponentially increased, because once, like you said, there is a market does not need to have emotions associated with it. They saw that there is a benefit to it and they jumped right in. And there are really good tools, a startup called SportWatt, who are enabling live streaming in a very simple and comfortable way for BVL as well, for that matter. So, yeah, I think the market's also ripening and awakening to the fact that beyond cricket, there is a market now. And BVL is an awesome example for it. So, yeah.
Of a grassroots level movement as well, right? So,
Correct.
It's very spontaneous and natural.
Yeah, in the Venn diagram of everything good, I think BVL is right at the center now. So
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's important. No, I think the fact that we can think out of the box, and not just see, the government has helped bring us this far, as in terms of sports. Now the markets in the society, the economy is doing well. People have the income, disposable income, to kind of to contribute or to be part of the system for it to grow. And so I think it's important that the markets in society seek for it, and the markets will automatically kind of ensure that it happens in whichever way, right? In whichever creative way. Of course, governance and other things, oversight is required, which where the government has to come into place. But otherwise, it's left to us, right? We can be as creative as possible based on the sport that will evolve. I'd like to just ask Ram. Now we have different NGOs also, right, with different goals, and for some, it could be reaching out to the rural India and using sports to break social norms and societal barriers, because that's also important, right? That we use sports can be used as a enabler, and we have other NGOs which might be using sports to help the locals gain employment and also ensure social development for the youth in that area. So all of these will eventually contribute to the sports pyramid in some shape or form. And for the for-profits, it could be more the focus on how their brand can gain more visibility, and then sports as a result, right? Whether it's a for-profit, non-profit, sports will then become an enabler and a way of life. So
Yeah.
can you just explain the role markets has played can play, right? A bigger role that they could play in the development across this pyramid?
Sure. I think again there is some encouraging good news as well on that front, because over the last decade or so, I think we have seen a lot of the larger companies, engaged into sport, and we've also seen the CSR kind of ambit widen a little
Right.
bit, right? So maybe I'll just spend a couple of minutes talking about that, because I think the people who are doing some sterling work in this area really need to be recognized. We've all heard about the
Sure.
Inspire Institute and JSW and their work in actually the academy that they've set up in northern Karnataka, right? I think that's been a great kind of effort, and there is, of course, the Reliance Foundation and the support that they give to both grassroots as well as elite kind of athletes. And the Tata Group has always been one of the one of the companies which have been supporting sport even before independence, so to say, right? Because when we
True.
look at the Tata Sports Academy and the Football Association and all of that. So I think some of the larger corporates, they have got the plot, they know, and their heart is in the right place, and we are seeing some good output out of them. But I think the problem is, as Vinay touched upon even in his initial kind of a thing, it's a little more complex in the sense it's a lot of grassroots level activity needs to happen, and the scale of it is quite large given the scale of our country itself. Right? So there's a
Right.
lot of untapped kind of potential in the rural areas, or even in urban areas which are not as privileged within the cities itself, right? So I think the good thing is, in addition to this, there have been quite a lot of NGOs, or the not-for-profit kind of organizations which have emerged. I was at least very pleasantly encouraged to see the work by across the board, again from grassroots to the elite, the kind of support that is extended by Go Sports, for example, or Simply Sport, and the organization that Sports Village, taking sports to the grassroots through the schools and so on, right? But the scale of the challenge is enormous, and I think they can use a lot of help, and that's where the CSR comes in. And again, I think I must kind of compliment the inclusion of sports within the ambit of CSR. I think there is still a little bit of work that needs to be done in terms of bringing awareness among the larger corporate kind of community, because if I remember the numbers right, out of the entire contribution towards CSR from corporates in the last year, only about 1% of that came to sport. Right.
Right.
So,
Right.
and I'm sure, and that amounted to about 600 crores. It's been growing, but the base is really small. And I think with a little awareness and knowing that sports can have so many collateral kind of benefits, corporates can be encouraged to contribute more towards the sports, and that money can then be used to support everything from grassroots to the elite. And I personally feel, the in-between space between grassroots and the elite, which is where, there's the so-called leaky bucket where people are not very sure whether they'll have a future in sport, and they need to have
Right.
a fallback option and, alternate career options and all of that. I think there's a lot of work that can be done there, and that will have a kind of cascading impact, because more people will be not so fearful of taking up sport as a career if they know that there are going to be fallback options for them. at some point of time, right?
Right.
So I think, to coming back to your question, I think the for-profits, the larger companies, they have seen and they have initiated them, and a lot more work can be done to support sports, and they're doing a great job, particularly at the elite sports level as well. Because there also they need a lot of exposure and so on. And the not-for-profits, by engaging in grassroots and also supporting people who are not yet elite but just about to kind of crack the ceiling, so to say, there too they can be a lot of engagement. So I think the short message really is good work has started. There are good examples to follow. A lot more needs to be done, and we would look to the corporates to support that.
Right. And we should not also forget, Ram, that there's a society also, right? Philanthropy is something that I think now with the society, the moment anyone gets more interested in anything, right? It could be sports, it could be arts, it could be culture, areas where the government would not primarily step in. Right. I think that's why society needs to kind of make a difference. It could be volunteering. You're volunteering your time. It could also be donating, right? You could have the monetary benefits are immense in terms of someone kind of setting up a corpus. It could be just sponsoring an event, just a local
Right.
RW event maybe, or just a kids event. All these things go a long way because you're motivating people who would not have otherwise been able to step onto the field because of the lack of funds, right? And I think donations is something, and we have seen that happening when there are natural calamities. Everybody get together, and people can make a difference, right? So I think philanthropy is something that we should not forget in terms of another an avenue from where funds could come in from. I just before we conclude, I just want to touch upon and this is also because India is big on tech and is and is an IT hub, right? So leveraging this advantage, we can think out of the box. We can come up with something creative, as we mentioned, for every sport. But I think tech is now here and is here to stay, and with AI also kind of making a big difference, right? I'd just like to hear from both of you. In fact, if you can share your thoughts on how it could play a larger role in sports in the coming years, and also making sports more accessible to the masses. So we should remember that most of our population is also in the rural, right? I mean, we have a high percentage there. So how do we ensure that they're getting physically active and they're not kind of falling into the rut of what cities and the tier one, tier twos, and the children there have kind of now, unfortunately, have kind of gone back in terms of physical activity and other things, right? So we need to ensure that the future too is strong for them and is something that they look forward to. Vinay, you want to
Sure.
go first, and then Ram?
Yeah. I'd be happy to. I think, yeah, tech's doing a whole lot of things in a whole lot of verticals, and sport, in all honesty, is actually catching up with what tech can bring to the table. As is the case with the market and money, tech has played a very big role at the top, which is at the elite level. But as you start trickling down to the grassroots levels, tech does not have too much of an impact just yet. And professionally, through Pagal Fan, I'm trying to do a bunch of things with my co-founder in order to bring that world of AI to spectator sports and fan engagement. Uh, but even from an independent research volunteering angle, tech, like I mentioned, is a great place of volunteering your time and effort. So you could build simple web applications or mobile applications to just inform people that, hey, there is this event happening very close to your house and they are looking for these 6 volunteers, right? This is a build once kind of exercise from a tech volunteering standpoint, which would be really helpful to a lot of people. And there is an education angle to it, which tech can facilitate because of its reach. Now, like I mentioned, SportBot as a live streaming platform, for example, uh, while I can sit at home in Bangalore and watch a Maharashtra Cricket League bit for under 14 cricketers, the same holds true for the other way around. Maybe there are children in the non-urban parts of India who could maybe learn a lot about pickleball and disc golf and cricket, because the advantage that they have that urban cities don't is space. So access to space is something that the rural part of India really can leverage on. So if we can simply share that education material that, hey, here is a low infrastructure, low equipment based sport that you could partake in, for all we know, that the next pickleball champion or the next disc golf champion comes out of one of these smaller towns.
Yeah, in fact, our recent Olympic champions all are from smaller
Everyone,
towns, right?
right?
There's nobody
Yeah.
from the cities. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think
Ram?
you hit upon the formula. I think even if you look at cricket and the emergence of players from the smaller towns, there is a pattern there, and it's probably linked to the availability of space, right?
Right.
Yeah,
And also, I think that drive to win, right? The drive to
the
really
drive to win,
make
the
it, right?
ambition, and
Yes.
all.
Right.
Correct. Yeah, less screen time. That's what you should say, right? So,
Exactly.
yes. I think the question was about tech in sport, right, Malti? So.
That's right. Yes.
I think I'll just maybe take a little macro view here, and it's evident, and it's everybody knows that India is kind of the global IT factory, IT hub, and we have a lot of large companies which are actually already engaged in doing exciting stuff around sports and technology. We've seen Infosys at the Australian Open, the French Open, and so on. We've seen TCS in various forums. We've seen, HCL, Cognizant at different points of time.
Right.
And they're also not just visible in terms of the tournaments itself, but they're also working as partners with organizations like the cricket boards in Australia or England, or the football, Manchester United. I think
Right.
HCL is a partner to them, right? But having said that, I think what it means is it brings a lot of talent. We always had the software talent, but now we have some domain also coming in, through the people who have worked here in those areas.
Right.
And then you look at the other macro factor in terms of the convergence of various technologies. And what Vinay mentioned, that tech is playing such a great part in sport, is so true, because it's playing a part not just in the training aspects, not just in the viewer engagement aspects, but also in terms of connecting people together and so on. So if you look at the convergence of things like computer vision, IoT, wearable technologies, artificial intelligence, as you mentioned, right? I think we are again seeing a confluence of talent in India itself, right? We have the software,
Right.
we have the technology skills, we are bringing in the domain skills. And if we get the mix right, we can also anchor this around our own leagues, our own tournaments, and that's where I think the Samaj and the Sarkar probably can work together a little more. And one of the interesting things in the national sports policy that you brought up earlier is also they talk about a sports tech incubator.
Right.
And it struck me as, this is such a lovely thought. Of course, it remains to be seen how much money actually comes in there. But and also I've been tracking the space, working with the startups thing, and I'm seeing a lot of VCs also are getting increasingly interested in this space, primarily because it has the potential to scale, and that's something that VCs love. They want something that
Right.
is nascent right now, and they want it to scale as it goes along, right? So I think there's a huge list of things that tech can actually play a part in sport, but I won't get into that. But I think we are placed in a very ideal position to really capitalize on this.
Right. And I think it's just the beginning, right? There's so much, as we've seen even in the percentage, whether it's the CSR, whether it's in anything, right? We're just at the cusp right now. I think there's a long road
That's
ahead
the
of
word.
us.
We are at the cusp. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was just going to add that when we talk about technology, and I'm relaying some of the mistakes that I made when I got into entrepreneurship. So if anyone's listening and doing similar things, maybe it helps them navigate their life better. We approach problems as engineers, and the inherent fallacy is we think about it as the most complicated technological solution is going to be the problem solver. But it's almost always a case of solution looking for a problem.
Right.
I hear you, Vinay.
Yeah, especially at the grassroots levels. I think technology can really be in its simplest form and still solve a big part
Right.
of the problem. So
Right.
I just wanted to add that aspect.
Yeah, it's a great thought. I mean, something very simple can actually solve a huge problem.
Yep.
The amount of technology that's getting into sport is unbelievable. I was looking at tennis, and there's a whole industry which is coming out based on the data which is coming out from the tennis leagues. right? And we all know what's happening. I think a couple of days back in Wimbledon, they were looking at doing away with the line
Replacing
judges, replacing, which
by
is a
next
kind
year.
of a
Yeah.
bittersweet use of technology, because you want the humans around the court as well. Of course,
Yeah.
sometimes they'll be on the firing line with people like, with a few of the players whom I shall not name, right?
Yeah.
But I think the role that technology plays, and Vinay is very right when he says it's a very simple solution, but sport is becoming very technologically intensive at all levels, especially at the elite level, again, as Vinay mentioned. I think sometimes having the access to a technology is the difference between a medal or no medal, or is the difference between a gold and a silver.
Right. No, so true, so true. And I think there's so much that we could continue to, kind of have a conversation around, because the very fact that now we see the potential that markets have, and how society too can play a major role, right? I think that's what, to our listeners, we need to kind of. I would just like to re-emphasize this, that the government has kind of been the primary driver of sports all these years since our independence. But it's time that the other two pillars, like the society and markets, who have equal or even more agency, right? And we have seen that through our conversation, that they stop being spectators and get onto the sports field, both figuratively and literally, and lead from the front. And that's important, because the markets and the society can actively promote a sporting culture in India. Yeah, and I'd like to just end by saying, let us be the change that we all wish to see. Right? And that's a quote from Mahatma Gandhi, and I think it's still so relevant even now. Yeah.
Very
Thank you
close
so
to
much,
second
Vinay.
October.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Ram. And
Thank you, Malti.
yeah, great having a conversation with both of you.
Thank
You guys-
you, Vinay. Thank
Yeah.
you, Malti.
Thanks, Ram. See you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.